You are not fit to raise a child, and I have the paperwork to prove it." She said it right there in my living room, one hand still resting on the child's shoulder. No one raised their voice. No one cried. There was only a thin folder on the table and a cold feeling running down my spine. In just 30 days, my own family turned me into someone mentally unstable, dragging me into a dispute where what they were after wasn't just the house I had just bought, but the only child who called me family. And that is the story of Claire Whitman. There are families that don't hit you with fists. They use manufactured concern, moral labels, and the fear of abandonment to slowly suffocate you. If one day the people closest to you say they're doing it for your own good, would you believe them? Or would you protect yourself before it's too late? And I'm Lisa. Before I tell Claire's story, tell me where you're listening from. Is it morning or evening where you are? If that question makes you uncomfortable, stay until the end of this video. I bought this house last spring in a quiet suburb of Ohio, where in the mornings you can hear the school bus rolling slowly past the end of the street, and in the evenings people still nod hello while mowing their lawns. 12 years of working, and I never borrowed $1 from my family. The day I signed the papers, I hung the keys on the hook by the door and stood for a long time in the empty living room, listening to the clock tick and thinking, this is enough. Noah ran laps around the house, counting the steps, opening and closing every door. He's lived with me since he was 6, after my sister's accident. I don't call it adoption. I just brought him home, and he stayed. Every night I kept a carton of milk ready in the fridge. Breakfast was toast and sliced apples. We had our own rhythm. My mother and my brother came to visit that first weekend. They brought apple pie and a small potted plant. The congratulations were spoken, but their eyes lingered longer than necessary. My mother asked what time I woke up, how many hours Noah slept, who picked him up when I worked late. My brother asked whether I'd bought insurance yet, whether I had anyone to help when I got overwhelmed. The questions sounded like concern, but lined up together they became a checklist. My mother remarked casually that I looked thinner. She stood up, opened the medicine cabinet under the sink, pulled out her phone, and snapped a few quick photos. I was in the kitchen washing glasses. When I came back, she had put the phone away, smiling like nothing had happened. Noah sat on the floor, fitting Lego pieces together, not looking up. I heard them whispering in the kitchen when they thought I was bathing Noah. My mother's voice dropped, firm. If she breaks down right now, everything will be easier. My brother didn't answer right away. I heard a drawer slide open, then shut. That night, after Noah was asleep, I opened my laptop to check work email. A new subject line appeared, from Noah's elementary school. A request to reconfirm legal guardianship. I stared at the screen, my hand still on the mouse, and the cold from earlier came back, sharper. The next morning, I got a call from the school office. The secretary's voice was still polite, but there was a very slight hesitation before she said the school had received some concerns from family. She said it, and then stopped, her eyes avoiding the stack of papers in her hand. The pause stretched long enough to make me feel like I was standing before a verdict that hadn't been announced yet. She asked if I could come in to clear things up. In the small conference room next to the library, the vice principal placed a stack of photocopies in front of me. I only needed to glance at the first page to recognize it. A psychological evaluation from 5 years ago, when I took 3 months off work due to exhaustion after surgery. That file had long been closed, signed by the doctor confirming I was stable. But the date in the top right corner was darkened in blue ink, as if it had happened just last week. "Your mother sent this to us," the vice principal said. "And your brother confirmed it." I nodded, my throat dry. No one had lied outright. They had just placed old truths in the wrong time. On the drive home, I drove slower than usual, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Small questions flickered through my head. Am I overreacting? Am I actually more tired than I think? Doubt crept in lightly, like dust. That evening, my mother stopped by. She didn't sit down. She stood by the kitchen table, one hand resting on Noah's chair, her voice lowered. "If you love the boy," she said, "let him be somewhere safer." There was no threat, just a suggestion wrapped in love. Noah looked up at me, not understanding the whole conversation, but understanding enough to stay silent. I stepped out onto the back porch, standing under the yellow light. An old image surfaced without warning. The day my sister died, the hospital hallway smelling of antiseptic, and Noah's tiny hand gripping my shirt, shaking so hard I had to kneel to meet his eyes. Back then, I didn't promise anything big. I just said, "Auntie's here." Some battles don't begin with shouting. They begin with stamped paperwork. That night, after Noah was asleep, I opened my computer. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text my brother. I logged into the hospital portal and pulled up my entire medical history. Every visit, every signature. The cursor blinked steadily on the dark screen. I needed to know exactly what they were using to say I wasn't fit to stand on my own. I scrolled through my medical records page by page. The blue glow of the screen filled the dark kitchen, the dishwasher humming steadily. In the evaluation from 5 years ago, the follow-up date had been changed. Not much, just off by exactly 3 months, enough to make a closed file look active. I zoomed in on the signature. The doctor's name was familiar, too familiar. I opened another tab and typed his name into the hospital site. A simple notice appeared. Retired 3 years ago. I called the hospital hotline and waited more than 10 minutes. The staff member confirmed the record history matched what I saw. "There were no updates after that date," she said. I wrote down the time of the call and her name, then saved the file. My hand shook slightly, but my mind started to clear. The next afternoon, my brother called. I let the phone ring 2 more beats before answering. His voice was gentle, familiar. He asked about Noah, asked if I was tired. I answered briefly. When I mentioned the file, he gave a small laugh. "I just took Mom to get another copy to keep things complete," he said. "It's nothing." I turned on the recorder and set the phone on the table. He continued, more slowly. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. All it takes is for the court to have doubts." The words landed in the kitchen like a metal spoon dropped on tile. I stayed silent. He took it as agreement. The call ended politely. I didn't call back. I didn't text. I backed everything up. The school emails, the altered file, the doctor's retirement notice, the audio recording. I created a new folder, named with the date. Each file had a short note, just enough for me to remember. That afternoon, I drove around the new neighborhood. The "sold" sign was still planted in my yard, not yet taken down. I stood on the porch, looking at the keys in my hand. The earlier questions came back, but this time in a different order. Why were they in such a hurry? Why did the story only need to be doubtful enough? That night, I opened my bank email to review the mortgage contract, the amount, the term, the clauses. A small line at the bottom about changes in household guardianship made me stop, not because of Noah, because of the house. I closed the laptop. The silence in the house thickened, no longer invisible. They didn't just want to decide a child's future. They wanted to touch what I had just built. And this time, I had no intention of explaining myself. That Sunday, I took Noah to church earlier than usual. The parking lot was still sparse, wind moving through the maple trees out front. Inside the foyer, The familiar hug still happened, but eyes lingered longer. Someone asked about Noah, then turned to ask if I was sleeping enough. Someone placed a hand on my arm, squeezing lightly, as if I had just been through a long illness. The sermon that day was about responsibility and protection. When everyone stood to pray, I saw my mother walk toward the pulpit. She held a tissue, her voice trembling. The story she told didn't include my name, but everyone understood. A grandmother worried about her grandson, afraid a child was living in an unstable environment. She didn't lie. She just chose the pieces that served her. I sat still, back straight, my hand resting on Noah's knee. He scribbled in a small notebook, not looking up. After the service, people gathered outside. Laughter faded when I walked past. A man I only recognized by face murmured, just loud enough for me to hear, "Her family is trying to save a child. Has anyone ever been looked at differently by a community because they believed an incomplete story? If so, you're not the only one." I nodded and kept walking. By the car, I saw the neighbor across the street glance over, then turn away. Their window curtain closed slowly. In the days that followed, rumors moved faster than I expected. At the grocery store, the checkout line was unusually quiet. At school, Noah's teacher asked more detailed questions about our schedule. I answered briefly, with enough information. No arguments, no explanations. That evening, I locked the door, turned off the lights, and sat on the floor of the empty living room. Streetlights spilled through the window in pale rectangles. I listened to the fridge hum softly, the wind on the porch. No tears. Just the feeling of being placed inside a circle of familiar faces, where every look carried an unspoken judgment. I called a lawyer, recommended by a coworker. We talked for 15 minutes. I summarized the situation. He asked a few questions and told me to keep every document, every message. I thanked him and hung up. Not yet. Before going to bed, I opened the folder I had created and added a new file. Notes about the service, the words, the looks. I didn't push back. I needed them to keep going, to go even further. 3 days after the church service, I received an overnight envelope, a petition for temporary guardianship. My mother's name was on the first page, her familiar signature, firm strokes. I read down to the line describing an unstable living environment, then folded it and placed it in the drawer with the other documents. Not yet. That afternoon, my brother called. His voice was lower, softer than usual. He said we should sit down and smooth things over. He mentioned Noah first, then the house. "A peaceful solution," he said. "You transfer the house into my name for a while. That way the kid will be more stable." He paused, as if waiting for thanks. I looked at Noah packing his school bag, the zipper catching and popping loose. I said it quietly, without rushing. "No." There was a brief silence on the line. Then he exhaled and told me to think about it. I ended the call. The next morning, the doorbell rang while I was making coffee. 2 people stood on the porch, dark jackets, badges hanging from lanyards. Child Protective Services. They spoke politely, asking permission to come in. I nodded and stepped aside. I set my phone on the shelf and turned on the recorder. No one objected. They walked through the house, asking about Noah's bedroom, the fridge, our daily routine. I answered each question, opening each door. Noah stood beside me, holding the hem of my shirt. I rested a hand on his back, a light touch. No words needed. An inspector crouched to Noah's level and asked a few simple questions. Noah answered, eyes flicking to me and then to the floor. I could hear the wall clock ticking, slow and even. The house I had just bought still had no pictures on the walls. Everything looked emptier than usual. They exchanged a quick look. The man turned to me, his voice steady and professional. "We need to speak with Noah alone," he said. "Just a few minutes." I looked at Noah. He tightened his grip on my hand. I nodded once, enough for them to see. In my mind, everything narrowed to a single point. Not fear, a boundary that had just been touched. I nodded to that request and stepped back half a pace. The door to the home office closed behind Noah and the caseworker. I stayed in the kitchen, poured myself more coffee even though my hands weren't shaking. 10 minutes later, they opened the door. Noah came out first, calmer than I expected. I touched his shoulder lightly, just enough to know he was okay. The visit continued like a checklist. I cooperated completely. I pulled up the security camera feeds on the porch, in the kitchen, and at the garage entry. I handed over Noah's routine schedule neatly taped to the refrigerator, the school's online communication log, and his most recent report card. I opened the filing cabinet and laid folders on the table, sorted by date. No long explanations, just what was already there. The caseworker looked through everything carefully. He asked a few questions about my work hours, who did drop-off and pick-up, what our usual dinners looked like. I answered briefly. When he flipped to the photocopied medical file, he stopped. "Do you know your family submitted falsified documents?" The question came out as lightly as a draft through a window, but it was enough to change the temperature of the room. I didn't answer right away. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the recordings folder, and set it on the table. The voice played, clear, familiar. "All it takes is for the court to have doubts. In your opinion, is staying silent in a moment like this wise? Or is it weakness?" No one interrupted. I let the recording play to the end, then stopped it. They exchanged looks. The woman wrote a few more lines, her pen strokes firm. The caseworker asked whether I had a lawyer. I said I had a contact number. He nodded and asked me to send copies of everything through their official email. I did it immediately. That evening, I called the lawyer. This time, the conversation didn't end at 15 minutes. We agreed on how to submit documents, how to store them, what I should and shouldn't say. I listened, wrote it down, and followed it. No arguing. No explaining beyond what was necessary. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't text my brother. I let them believe the guardianship petition was moving forward, that CPS was reviewing me. I kept taking Noah to school on time, grocery shopping on the same days, turning on the cameras every night. 3 days later, I received an email from CPS confirming they had opened a supplemental investigation. The wording was short and objective. It didn't mention my name. It didn't mention my family. But the direction of the arrow had changed. The courtroom was small, the ceiling low, the white lights making everything look flat and cold. My mother sat on the left, gripping a tissue, her shoulders slightly hunched like someone who'd just survived a long winter. When she was invited to speak, she stood, her voice trembling at exactly the right moments, talking about sleepless nights, about her fear of a child being placed in an unstable situation. No one cut her off. The story was told smoothly, enough to make people want to reach out and help her. My brother sat beside her, leaning forward. When it was his turn, he spoke about the responsibility of an older brother, about how he didn't want things to go too far. He glanced at me once, very quickly, like proof of concern. I sat upright, both hands on the table, and listened to the end. The judge flipped through the file and stopped at the signature page. She looked up. "Where is the doctor who signed this evaluation currently practicing?" The question wasn't loud or sharp. My mother answered with an old address. The judge nodded and turned toward me. I stood, walked forward, and handed over a printed confirmation from the hospital showing the doctor's retirement, with the date clearly listed. No explanation. Just placed it down. The judge read it, turned the next page, and stayed silent. When silence lasts longer than a defense, the balance starts to shift. My lawyer asked to speak. He requested a handwriting and date stamp analysis. My brother leaned in to whisper to my mother. The tissue in her hand crumpled. I heard a chair scrape lightly behind me, someone shifting. The judge tapped the gavel once, short. The hearing was postponed for verification. No ruling, no advice, just a new date set. I returned to my seat, gathered my documents, and stacked them neatly. Out in the hallway, the air felt thick. My mother questioned their lawyer in a rushed voice. My brother looked around, avoiding my eyes. His phone kept vibrating. I stood a few steps away, leaning against the cold wall, watching people pass like I was looking at a scene that no longer belonged to me. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I only opened my bag and checked the locked folder of evidence again. The elevator doors closed. Inside, the overhead light reflected my face, calmer than before. Not because I was sure I'd win, but because, for the first time, their story wasn't following the script they'd written. The results came on a morning with light rain. My lawyer called while I was parked outside Noah's school. He didn't circle around it. The file had been falsified. The signature didn't match. The date stamp had been altered. I thanked him, hung up, and watched Noah run through the gate, his jacket speckled with rain. I sat still a few seconds longer before driving away. The next hearing moved faster. No more long speeches. The judge read the verification results, then turned to the CPS report. False allegations, insufficient grounds for any guardianship action. The room went quiet, like someone had just turned off a noisy fan. When the judge looked up, her voice wasn't raised, and it wasn't heavy. Family is not a license to cause harm. The sentence was set down in the room, clean and final. I saw a few people in the back row shift. My lawyer kept writing, his pen steady. The guardianship petition was denied. The court issued a warning about submitting misleading documents and imposed a fine. No one clapped. No one let out an audible sigh of relief. My mother sat straight, the tissue resting on her lap, still unused. My brother stared down at his phone, the screen dark. When they stood, the chairs made a soft scrape against the floor. I gathered my papers and slid each sheet into a hard folder. My mother turned to look at me. For the first time, her eyes weren't searching for sympathy. No tears at the perfect moment. No prepared line. Just an empty stare, like someone whose role had been pulled out from under them mid-scene. I answered with silence. Out in the hallway, my lawyer said a few words about next steps. I nodded. My phone buzzed with a message from the school confirming everything was clear. I replied, "Received," and put it away. On the courthouse steps, the rain had eased. I stood under the overhang and took a short breath, just enough to loosen my chest. No rush of victory, only a clean, quiet space, where the truth had passed through and left the floor level. I turned and walked down the steps, my keys cold in my hand. The days after moved more slowly. No calls, no texts. The family thread on my phone went completely silent, like someone had pulled the plug. Sunday came, and I drove Noah past the church and kept going straight. No one asked where we were. No one stopped by. The noise from before vanished so quickly it left behind a strange kind of emptiness. That evening, Noah sat on the living room rug, building something with his blocks. He looked up naturally, like he was asking what time dinner would be. "Do we still have Grandma?" The question wasn't angry. It was just something that needed a name. I paused, resting the wooden spoon on the edge of the pan. The sizzling oil softened. I didn't answer right away. I knelt to his eye level and placed my hand on his shoulder. "We still have each other," I said. That was enough for now. When night fell, I replaced the front and back door locks. The click and scrape of metal echoed down the hallway. Clean, decisive. I changed my phone number and updated the school and the lawyer. Small, familiar tasks, like putting a room back together after a storm. Each time I finished something, I crossed a line off my list. I stood in front of the living room wall where the old photo frames hung. Birthdays, Christmas, smiles captured at the right moments. I took each frame down and placed it into a cardboard box. No throwing, no tearing, just putting them away. In that moment, tears came without warning, hot and fast. I sat on the floor, my back against the bare wall, and let them pass. The next morning, sunlight came through the window, unobstructed by the frames. The room was brighter, emptier. I made coffee, opened the window to let the air in. Noah put on his shoes and waited at the door. We went out on time, unhurried. On the road, I looked at the trees lining the street, their leaves fresh after the rain. Some losses aren't loud, but they leave long marks. I wiped my face with the back of my hand at a red light. No regret, no turning back, just driving, straight ahead. In the weeks that followed, my life slowly found its rhythm again. I kept Noah and this house, two things that should have been obvious, but took a long road to protect. In the morning, we still ate breakfast at the same kitchen table, the window cracked open for sunlight. At night, I locked the door as a new habit, not out of fear, but because I knew where my boundaries were. But some things didn't return. The image of the family I once trusted, once leaned on, was gone. There was no gentle reconciliation moment, no hug that closed everything neatly. Justice came, clear and necessary, but it didn't bring complete comfort. I learned to accept that, like accepting an empty room in a house, without needing to fill it with anything else. I didn't need to shout to draw a line. I only needed to say no at the right moment and stay silent when it mattered. Some nights, after Noah fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room and listened to the clock. The sadness came and went, not violently. It stayed like a reminder. Some right choices don't feel good. I accepted the incompleteness, and I don't regret protecting what was right. The story you just heard is fiction, inspired by real-life situations and human experience. It isn't meant to encourage anyone to copy the actions in it. The narrator is only sharing a deeply human perspective. Sometimes protecting yourself isn't betrayal, it's growing up. And if there's one small gift to leave you with after this story, it's a gentle reminder. Trust your instincts, especially when everything around you is trying to make you doubt yourself. And I'm Lisa. If you stayed with me to the end, thank you so much. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Is it a quiet morning or a late night after a long day? If you've been through something similar, you can share it in the comments. Your story might be the thing that makes someone else feel less alone. If this story touched you, please give the video a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Your presence here truly matters. Thank you for listening, and I hope I'll see you again in the next video.